Good afternoon. Hello, hello, hello. I don't want to be rude, but I will. Shut your mouths. Talking to you, Clark. Like a trapper keeper. Zip it. I don't think they zip. No, I'm kidding. You guys can keep talking. Daggers. Awesome. How many of you guys enjoyed your lunch? Everyone not raising their hand is lying. This is DeLand. Best food ever. Right. There is no Chipotle, but there is De La Vega. Yeah, we're trying on Chipotle. All right. So a couple housekeeping details, and then we're gonna get Pete back up here to take us a step further. We have had, because of the great turnout, a bit of congestion in the restrooms. So if you were not clear, there are restrooms back through this middle door, and to the left there are two right there. But we also have some additional space that belongs to us in the back. So if you go around sort of the big glass window here, there's just a long hallway, and there's a restroom on the right, and then there's another one around the corner. So feel free to use those. Please don't destroy them, or else we have to hire a custodian to clean up after you. So just that would be great if you were respectfully using restrooms. Kindergarten rules, right? So what we're going to do, just to sort of lay out the rest of the afternoon, Pete's going to talk a little bit more, sort of guide us from some of the theoretical into the practical. Again, after this session, there will be books for sale. I will attempt to keep him with us out here for just a moment at the table if you want to get some of that stuff signed. I know a couple people mentioned that, so you can have some book signatures as well. And then we're going to do another, probably a good hour break where you can either sit and have coffee here. We'll keep the coffee coming all day as long as you guys want it, and as long as we have it. I think we have enough. We should be close. So, okay, good. We got coffee left, so we'll keep the coffee coming. Or if you want to use that opportunity to walk downtown, there's a couple shops down there. And again, it'll just be some room to breathe, kind of process what we get in this talk. And then we'll come back for the last session, taking a more extended break for dinner. And then everyone that would like to is welcome to come back just for some socializing. We'll have live music with Mike the Prophet, who's one of a musical artist who's also a part of Collective, one of the musicians here. So he'll be releasing a new album soon. First iteration of his live band ever presented, which should be pretty cool. So if you want to come for that tonight, that'd be great too. And again, tonight, there won't be any additional content provided by Peter or anybody. It's just going to be a chance for us to be together, process, gel a little bit more. And I did want to say, because some people seemed like they maybe didn't know, a part of the Threshold Weekend event is that our regular Sunday night service is at 5 p.m. That's open to the public. So if you want to invite people that didn't want to come and like pay for the Threshold Weekend thing, everybody's welcome at the Sunday night service. We will have childcare if they want to come, and we will sort of give Pete the bulk of the time to sort of wrap the weekend up on Sunday night. So if you're coming from a couple hours away, I know it's a lot to ask you to drive, but he's beautiful. I mean, come on, you got to get back here to see him, right? Any questions for the good of the group? All right, anticlimactic introduction, Peter Rollins.
Am I on? Oh, yep, yeah, you came back. Well done. This is a lot of stuff to process. So hopefully you're getting something out of it and all of that. It's not easy. I guess this session is going to be a bit of a mop-up session from kind of going a little bit deeper into some of the things we looked at previously, things that I didn't get to. If you're looking at the titles of the talks and kind of wondering where they connect with anything I'm saying, you're going to have to use a lot of creativity, lateral thinking. They do vaguely connect, but we're mucking the titles around. Often I give a title to a talk because everyone wants a title. What are you going to talk about? Just write anything, and you just talk about whatever you want. So, Ben 6 months ago said, "Can you give me 3 titles?" And I gave him 3 titles, and I don't even know what I said. But it does somehow connect. I shouldn't let you behind the curtain. They should pretend that everything's in order, everything's working. Which, by the way, is an interesting point. I was young and they'd say about you have to dress in your Sunday best to go to church or whatever when you're a kid. Dress up in your Sunday best. But actually, in a sense, the church always dresses up in its Sunday best. If you've ever been to like a mega church where everything is just so well run, so smooth, it's everything's perfect. It's that idealized image, I often quite like a little bit of a messiness. And that's clearly my personality, but where you kind of see that things don't quite work, the technology's a bit rubbish, and someone trips and falls, and it's not like we're trying to pretend in the actual structure that everything is beautiful and clean, that somehow the structure itself is a little bit messy, can sometimes be quite an interesting thing, rather than always trying to make everything super smooth, that, playing into that ideal ego thing. But anyway, that's beside the point. The symptom, the whole thing that I was talking about earlier can be summed up in that one example I used of, there's a church, for example, where belief is important. You have a strong set of coherent, internally strong statements. You've got a series of books. You've got a strong theological system that makes sense of the world, and that's all nice, and it looks good, and it looks strong, right? In this example, you see this community goes really crazy about something, some particular book. Not every book, like loads of books don't matter. Loads of books disagree, thousands, tens of thousands of books disagree, right? They're not mentioned. But one book comes out that causes this disproportionate response. So that would be then the symptom. You've got the superego, which is the kind of the image. You've got this then symptom. And in the example, you then kind of go under the symptom. You listen to the symptom, and as you listen to the symptom, you maybe start to think that, oh, actually some of the stuff that's in this book are questions that exist, but they've been pushed down because we're trying to say, listen, we all believe such and such. We all have the right answers. And so because we're pushing down any of the doubts or concerns or ambiguity that we have, it's somehow exploded in this way. And then the job is for those people who want to, and the religious leaders, or kind of the prophetic role is to speak that, to allow that truth to come to the surface. To allow that to come to the surface. And what I want to do by the end of today is look at practically, like the question you asked, how do we do this without getting killed or losing our jobs or just annoying everybody, right? Oscar Wilde famously said, if you want to tell people the truth, make them laugh, otherwise they'll kill you, right? So, humor is definitely one of the ways to do it. But one of the questions what we won't get to, and this is important, is we won't to look at what this looks like. What does the next iteration look like? Whenever you do this in your community, what results? What's future church? What's the next iteration? Now, I actually have lots of opinions about what that looks like, and I spend a good part of my time trying to develop communities that express what I think the next iteration is going to be, right? So I'm really interested in that question. But we're not going to address it, and there's a number of reasons. One is because we don't have time. We only have one day. And two is, if I tell you what I think it looks like, you might go, that sounds rubbish, I wouldn't want to be part of that, right? And then you might not want to do this process of just raising the truth to the surface. And the fact is, I'm probably wrong about what the next iteration will look like. Because it's almost impossible to think outside of the system that you're within. So I might be right, and I think I am, but I'm probably not, right? And the point is, you don't actually have to know what the next thing looks like in order to seek out the symptom in your community, seek out what it speaks, and bring that to the surface. You don't need anything. You don't need to have a 10-page document about what the next ministry is going to be, right? You just have to do that, and the new thing will arise. Because the current system cannot continue as it is when the truth comes to the surface. It shakes and it shakes and it shakes, and it can't cope. It'll either try to push the stuff down, or it will rupture, or it will radically reconfigure. And the example I used was the relationship where you bring the stuff up that's not being spoken, and either the couple break up, or they find dating. But one thing that can't happen is that things just happen as previously happened, Because the problem is this, is every time you have a dream and a vision about what the next thing is, you know what, this church I'm part of, this community I'm part of, it's not great. I have a vision of what would be better, right? We all have that, especially on our youth, we're in our 20s and we want to create something good. The problem is our desire and our dream is usually just an idealized reflection on our existing beliefs. What I mean by that is, fantasies and desires. Your fantasies are basically getting your ideals without the things that inhibit. When you fantasize, you get what you desire without all the symptom which seems to block, right? But everything I've been saying in the last session is saying the symptom is not the blockage to the perfection. The symptom is inherently part of the system. It's inherently part of it. So, for example, fairy tales are the idealized reflections of your society's values. If you say to someone, fulfill your dreams, what you're saying is not... is basically like if you value wealth, fulfill your dreams means becoming wealthy. If you value power, it means becoming powerful. If you value being in a relationship or whatever, it's about getting the relationship. Your dreams are the idealized reflections of your present values. So in fairy tales, in our fairy tales, poor people become wealthy, powerless people become powerful, single people become married, right? That's our things. And so you can look at our fairy tales and you can see what we value as a society. Other cultures have powerful people becoming powerless, wealthy people becoming poor, people in relationships and family and marriage becoming single, right? So if someone in a community says, right, okay, I have a dream for something, and you say, okay, give me a 10-page document to outline what it is you're going to do. If they can do that in a really clear way, don't bother with it, right? Because it's just going to be, it's not going to be good. It's not going to be better than what you've already done, and there's perfectly good reason for that. It's because look at you, you'll be running it. These are disasters. I think it's going to be good. Look at you. You couldn't. Do a piss up in a brewery, as they say back in Ireland. Let alone you're going to make something really, really good, right? And there is no perfection. There's the old story I love about this guy. You probably heard me say it, but a guy's on a desert island. He's been on the desert island for 20 years, completely on his own. He was like washed up there. And eventually he gets rescued. This plane's flying overhead, and they see some buildings in this clearing. And they go like, "Oh my goodness, someone's on that island." And they land, and there's this Irish guy, Seamus, and he's sitting there, right? Oh, Seamus, okay. And they chat, and then he goes like, "Listen, before we take you off the island, bring you back to Ireland, show us where you lived." And Seamus goes, "Okay," he says, "Come with me." So brings them to a clearing and shows them this house. He says, "I built that house, a couple of years in. It's got like running water, it's good shelter, it's great." What's the building beside it? Oh, he's like, "Oh," he says, "that's my church." He says, "I'm a very religious man. I go there every Sunday and, pray and worship. Every Wednesday night, go there." Oh, fair enough. "What's the building beside it?" Seamus like, "Oh, I don't want to talk about it." "Oh, come on, what's the building beside it?" "Oh, I can't talk about it." "Well, come on, tell me." He says, "That's a church I used to go to. Terrible place," right? Now, that's what we want to do. We always are kind of wanting to put the darkness in the other place that we were at and create a new community where everything's great and everything's wonderful. And of course we know that that's never going to work because we bring our own anxieties and darkness and brokenness with us. And so the challenge isn't to create a new Eden. The challenge is, how do we create a community where we can bring to the surface those parts of ourselves that we push down, that cause discretion. So in that story, Seamus doesn't have anyone else to the way the story works is, of course, he's completely on his own, but he still has to externalize the brokenness and the badness. He still has to split the world. But this is exactly what kids do whenever they say the monster's under the bed, right? There's no monster. We are the monster. But when you can't realize that the monster under the bed is a part of yourself, you externalize it into the other. And part of becoming healthy is, as I say, realizing that the monster isn't under the bed, the monster is inside us. And tarrying with that and wrestling with that and bringing that to the light of day. So there's two tasks. One is simply, whatever community you're in, conservative, liberal, whatever, is just go, what are our ghosts? What are the unspoken things? And in your community, it will be different from my community. They're different. What are they? And bring them to the surface. And then there's a second challenge of working out what's going to come up when you do that. Because that's, to be honest, what reformations are. Reformations are whenever that happens in a systematic way, and it's something new erupts, a new form of church life, a new form of community that's in some way connected to what went before, but also different, also transformative, also something you couldn't have imagined. But you don't have to get caught up in the new. You do the old. Like when I started Icon, which is the community that I was part of, we didn't know what we were doing. The challenge wasn't to fulfill our dreams. It was to put ourselves in a place where we could dream new ones. Right? So we started doing things, experimenting. And people would ask me, why are you doing such and such? And I would make something up. And then if it sounded good, I'd go, I should write that down. That's very good. I say, and then I fooled myself into thinking we're doing it because of that reason. But, in many respects, we were trying to create that space where we could just bring stuff to the surface and then see what emerged, what concrete form of community came out of that. And it was experimental. Kierkegaard says life is lived forwards but understood backwards. You're moving forward not knowing where you're going, and you look back and then you kind of make sense of it in the past. So what I've been talking about then is you have this superego, this kind of the propaganda poster. And the propaganda poster generates a symptom, and you address a symptom, and we all have it. There's a story that Zizek tells that grasps this superego idea really well. It's about Jesus who takes up golf, right? So Jesus kind of, I don't know what he's watching, but he's like, I really want to try golf. So he goes out, he buys all the best stuff, but he's terrible, right? Really, really bad. And he's with some friends, and they're like, Jesus, you don't know what you're doing, right? And Jesus like, back off, right? I'm Son of God, right? Back off. And Jesus is teeing up, and he takes out the wrong golf club. They're going like, that's an iron. You should be using a wood, And he's like, come on, wait till you see what I can do. He's like, yeah. And then he's swinging, and he's like standing all wrong, and his friends are trying to correct him. And again, he's saying, back off, just back off. And Jesus hits the ball and slices it straight into a pond. He's like, and he goes over, walks on the water, right? Walks in the water, goes in right to the middle of the pond, lifts out the ball, walks back, frustrated, and puts it back on the tee. Tees up again, slices it a second time, straight back into the pond. He goes over, walks on the water, picks up the ball. Now, as this is happening, somebody's just walking past and sees this. And they're like, who does that guy think he is? Jesus Christ. And Jesus' friends go, no. He says, that is Jesus Christ. He thinks he's Rory McIlroy, right? Now, so there is. Even Jesus has a superego, right? He's wanting to be Rory McIlroy. And that's what it is. It's the idealized image that we kind of... but the funny thing is, it's usually our idealized image is ourself. Right? There was somebody I saw on Twitter said, I wish someone looked at me the way Kanye West looks at Kanye West, right? That's the narcissistic glance where someone falls in love with their own mirror image. They fall in love with their own image of themselves. So there's Kanye West, the musician, who has all this money and power and all of that. But that's not Kanye West, just the guy who is struggling with life and getting on with things. And actually, narcissism is generally the result of shame. Narcissism is generally a defense against shame. But you see this actually in Oprah in a different way. Oprah Winfrey once said, sometimes I have to take the advice of Oprah, right? So Oprah realizes that she's not Oprah. Oprah realizes that the image of Oprah that we all know is, in a sense, the person who can give you your best life now, the person who says, there are no mistakes and all of it, and everything's wonderful, and the universe is for you, all of that. But she's just this regular person watching, these are the days of our lives, whatever it's called, on afternoon TV, being bored and wondering what it's all about at times. So she goes like, sometimes I need to take the advice of myself. That's the kind of superego is the idealized image of ourselves that we sometimes mistake for ourselves. And this begins in childhood, something I've talked about a lot before, so I won't get into it too much. But a child who is falling over and weak, we tell them they're strong, but they're not. They're weak. Children are weak. They're rubbish, right? They're like, the little boy who scratches his knee is not a brave soldier. Brave soldiers don't scratch their knees and cry, right? It's worrying, it's like, what? You can beat a kid in a race. They're not fast. They're slow. I can beat a kid every single time I race a kid. Give them a head start. I'll still beat them, right? They're not. But we say, you're fast, you're strong, and that's great. That gives you a sense of mastery that covers over your brokenness. But we continue to play these games. We continue to do that. We begin to believe our image. This actually, back to Miami Vice. In one of the episodes of Miami Vice, I think they've been on for a while and they were beginning to drop off in terms of the people watching. And so they had this really interesting storyline. But it was that, so Sonny Crockett, if I'm getting the names right, Sonny Crockett would played a drug dealer. Which was Sonny Burnett, I think. And so he pretended to be this cool drug dealer, and he's just a police officer. But then there's an explosion on a boat, and he narrowly misses death. But he has a type of concussion, and when he comes out of the concussion, he believes he's Sonny Burnett. He thinks he is the person that he's been playing for all these years. And they have this really interesting kind of like a couple of episodes where he actually thinks he is the person that he's pretending to be. That's kind of how we all are. Sometimes we think that we are the people. Like if you dress up on a Friday night and you go out and you're looking really well, and you kind of like, in a sense, you kind of can think that you're the embodiment of this person. And you are, but then whenever somebody, you can sometimes feel they're not relating to you at all. You are yourself and yet you're not. There's this ideal image that's both you and yet not you at the same time. It's interesting. There's all of that. That's the kind of superego. And why am I saying that? This all makes sense. Honestly, in my head, it all makes sense. Oh yeah, and what we do is we think that if only we could get rid of the one little problem in our community, that little outburst of anger, that's why if we could get rid of that, everything would be great. Or if we're in a relationship and we think, if only we could fix these one or two things, then everything would be perfect. We want the ideal, we want the wholeness, the completeness, of course we do. But either we never quite get there, there's always something that's getting in the way, and that's why we fantasize getting it without the problem, right? So that's the fantasy. And we can create a new church community that will be able to have this, we'll all love each other, wholeness, completeness, we'll have the answer. We can fantasize that, but it never pans out. It just never pans out, right? Because in reality, there's always some obstacle, right? But we fantasize and we go like, if only we could do something a little bit different, it'd be better. But we never get there, and that's depressing. We just feel again and again, and it's difficult. Or sometimes the other thing we do is we also fantasize and think other people have it. We look at other people and think, oh my goodness, they've got the relationship, or that person doesn't have any doubts, or I wish I was like them. We fantasize that someone else has the pleasure that we don't have, right? In relationships, if you break up with someone and you're in the corner crying with a tinfoil hat on, collecting urine in bottles or something, and as you do, and you're imagining that the other person is out having a blast. They're having a laugh, they're partying, they're like dancing, they're going out with other people, and it's like, I have the pleasure that I don't have. They're enjoying themselves, and you hate them for it. I broke up with someone, that was how I was doing. Now, it so happened she was having a laugh, but just because you're paranoid doesn't mean you're wrong. But you fantasize that the other has the very thing that you can't ever seem to get. And it can make you really angry and frustrated. So in Solomon, the story of Solomon's wisdom, where two women come to Solomon, and one of the women says, she had a kid and her kid died, and so she stole my child. And Solomon says, oh yeah, well give me a knife, I'll cut the child in half. And one of the women says, don't do it, right? And he realizes that she's the mother. But it also says the other woman says, so be it. Go ahead. Like, why would the other woman say, go ahead? Why would the other, not just remain silent, why would the other woman say, yeah, kill the kid? And it's because sometimes if we think the thing that would make us whole and complete has been robbed from us, we can so hate it when we see someone else who seemingly has that we can actually want terrible things to befall them. So in anti-Semitism, you see this. The figure of the Jew has been the one who has the stuff that's for us. They've got the money, they've got the power, they've got something, and they've got the object of pleasure. If only we get that. And fascism, you can see this very clearly how it functions. Fascism is kind of, in a sense, a group of people who are going, we want to have a non-antagonistic kind of community, without abstraction, grounded in the earth, kind of like, the ideal peasant kind of life and all of that. But there's an obstacle, and the obstacle is the Jew. Get rid of them, and we can have this thing. But what's interesting is the figure of the Jew is not the problem, it's the solution to a problem. What the figure of the Jew allows is it allows that community to cover over their own inherent antagonisms. So they can unify through shared hatred of that figure. If they got rid of the figure, they think that get rid of the figure and then we can enter into this kind of community. But it's actually that figure that allows them to have a modicum of community. Get rid of the figure and they would realize their own inherent antagonisms and the whole thing would collapse. That's why in Russia, you could see the kulaks represented this. They're saying, we get rid of the kulaks, the owners of the means of production or whatever, and things would be better. And they persecuted them and killed them. But the problem was things didn't get any better. And you're starting to go, oh, that's not the problem. So the definition of the kulak began to expand and expand to, basically, peasants who hired people, or I'm nervous because there's someone who's an expert in Russian stuff here. I'm just digging a hole as I notice her, like, yeah, oh my God. He's not saying this. Yeah. It's not even pronounced kulak. But the definition increased and increased until it kind of became just a wealthy peasant, or until it came a kulak is someone who would think like a kulak, or would think like a kulak if they had the chance to think like a kulak. The definition, some Russian leaders said, it just became whatever we wanted it to mean. In other words, the kulak was needed as a figure of obstacle to be overcome. But it was needed in order to maintain a sense of community. You'll have seen this in churches and stuff where, in some senses, in order to maintain a very tight group, you have to have a common enemy. And you think, oh, if we only convert all the atheists or something, then everything would be great. But actually, it's that idea that is able to maintain a modicum of community and cover over kind of inherent antagonisms within the group. So, yes, so why am I saying this? You've got to keep me right. Where was I before anyone want to help me? Please? Scapegoating. Well, that was scapegoating. I don't think I even used that word, so it's gold star to you. Yeah, that's the thing of scapegoating. Oh yeah, well, okay, that's where we're going with the scapegoating. Very good. The scapegoat is the figure that carries our lack. There's that verse that says, the poor you will always have with you. And I quite like it because at first it sounds really depressing, the poor you'll always have with you. It's terrible. But what if, we are poor. There is always a lack. And if we don't learn to carry our own lack, we'll put it on someone else. We'll get them to carry it. And so the scapegoat is the one who carries the lack. Sin meaning lack, the lack. And the whole thing about Christianity, you could say, is acknowledging, realizing that the scapegoat is actually the site of our salvation. The very thing that we think is the problem is the site of our salvation, and that's where I wanted to go with this. Yes, the symptom is our salvation. So in other words, think about the homeless. Again, oh, right. That reminded me to look at. He made a timer for me which says "Shut up, Pete," and but it's gone, so I don't. Yeah, I think I've got another 15 minutes, so I'm good. The symptom is our salvation. In the homelessness, often people do homeless work because we think we are bringing good news to the homeless. We are there to help them, to bring salvation to them of some kind, transformative. But the truth is, in a sense, they are our salvation, right? That the homeless reflect a crisis within our own society. The reason why the homeless population is there is because of a crisis in a system that we are inherently part of. And if we go to them, we will hear the good news of going, this is the solution to a problem within our own culture and society. We will have to make changes in our culture and society which will transform us. So we go to, the homeless in order to be converted, to be saved. And that's difficult for us because it's always easier to be the person doing the saving. We all want to be that. We don't want to be saying that we're the person who really need to be saved. Same with prison work. Prison system in America is not the problem, it's the solution to a problem. Putting behind bars people who are poor, who are black, who are undereducated and all of that. There's something about that speaks to a problem within our own culture and within our own society. And so we have to go into prison ministry, not to save them and help them, but because they are God to us. They are the site of salvation to us. Just as, within the fascist thing, the figure of the Jew is seen as the problem, but actually the figure of the Jew prevents the fascist community from looking at their own inherent antagonisms. And so actually, the person that they think is the problem is the site of their salvation. If they can look at that figure and see in that figure something of their own problems. This is called conversion, I think. My reading of conversion is, so the basic conversion in Christianity is Saul, right? That's the ground zero of what conversion is. And you see this very structure. There's Saul, right, who is educated, religious authority, has kind of, a citizen of Rome, all of this stuff. So he's like a fine, upstanding citizen, right? But something's not right, something's not working. And he blames this new sect that's there. If only we could get rid of them, everything would be great. They are the problem that needs to be got rid of. So that's the symptom. That's the problem. We need to cut that out. And that's what happens with a symptom. The first thing about a symptom is, one, you don't notice it. First thing about a symptom, you don't notice it. So that's the weird thing, for example, that really talks about humility all the time, right? And yet they seem to talk like they have all the answers. And you think that's really bizarre. You go, like, they're always talking about the value of humility, and yet they seem to, they basically say, like, we know basically how the universe works. But it's not noticeable from within the community. It's just not noticeable. It seems so obvious from outside, but it's weirdly not obvious. Or they talk about, not being worldly, and yet they, the minister's got a private jet and has got a white suit and kind of like has got all of this stuff that's kind of like, their church looks more like a shopping mall than anything, with Starbucks and stuff in it, right? And it's weird for us because you go like, okay, I'm not saying that's wrong. And so what I'm saying is it's weird, like, it's wrong to you. I mean, you're saying let's not be worldly, and yet do you not see? But that's the thing about a symptom. You don't see your own symptoms. At first, it's very bizarre, but it's like the detective. We don't see the anomaly. The second thing is you see the anomaly, and then you go, oh, that's not really me, right? It's like a cancer you could cut out. Oh, if I could get rid of that. Oh, I've got outbursts of anger. I just need to fix that. But the problem is, it's like whack-a-mole. Every time you try to deal with the issue, it springs up in a different way. I don't know what it is. I think I just don't move this arm. I'll just keep it here. I talked to somebody in Australia who, he was listening to me talk, and he said, well, Pete, this is all very interesting, but he says, but I have a problem with jealousy. And he says, I've found a way of dealing with that. There's a prayer that I pray when I'm feeling jealous and I can't sleep and all of this, and it's a kind of meditation I do. And I'm able to deal with it. And I go like, yeah, but I said, like, how long have you been doing that? He says, well, about 15 years. I'm like, it's not working. It's not working. The point is not that every time you feel really completely insanely jealous for no reason at all, you say this prayer and it all feels a bit better. There is a way of living without that insane jealousy, and that you got to kind of work it. So if you say, oh, the symptom's the insane jealousy, but I've got a way of dealing with that. But it keeps on reappearing. It has to be dealt with in different ways. So that's it. And then the third element of the symptom is you go, oh, no, that is me than I realize. So with Paul and Saul, he's at first got like, he's the upstanding person, he's part of the religious system, and he's going like, there's a symptom, these Christians, this sect, right? Get rid of them and things will be better. And then he has the insight. He's knocked off his horse, so Caravaggio has him knocked off his horse, and he's blinded, and he hears this voice saying, "Why are you persecuting me?" Right? Which is profound. Like, I am in the symptom. I am in the very thing that you think is the problem is your salvation. The very place that you think you have to get rid of or sort out or destroy, that's where I am. And Paul undergoes this radical transformation. And so, in a sense, conversion is where you go, who is the outsider, who is the enemy, or who is the societal outsider who we think we should get rid of. Either get rid of, like kill, or get rid of as in, the homelessness, but we can get rid of that. And go, no. We go and we listen. And we listen and we look at what that's saying to our own community and about our own society. We let that speak. We bring that truth to the surface. And we are transformed. And then the really crazy little extra bit of that is then the symptom begins to vanish. I can't remember, is it Oscar Romero, or I don't know if it was, but said, people, I pull people out of the water and they call me a saint. I ask who's throwing them in, they call me a communist, right? It's like, yeah, you can hit the symptom, but if you look at what the cause of the symptom is, that's more of the difficulty, that's more of the problem. So, how do we, and this is where I want to kind of like finish this mop-up session before we go practical, is what's the first step in being able to help a community isolate and understand its fears? And its fears are always concrete manifestations of lack. Paul Tillich, the theologian, says this. He says, I think it's in The Courage to Be, he says, ultimately lack comes in three tastes, three different flavors. There is death. Death is an ultimate lack, right? You're no longer there, so it's a lack. And there's two types. There's the near-death thing where you go, oh my goodness, I nearly died, right? And then there's the strong form, which is, oh, I'm going to die, right? And that can be anxiety-producing, and most of us don't want to think too much about that, of course, right? But it's there. But he also says, but sometimes it's meaninglessness, which is a lack of meaning, where he says, the weak form is, I don't like my job at the moment. I don't find meaning in it. I need to do something else, right? And the strong form is, I don't think there's any meaning whatsoever, right? That's the strong form. But sometimes it arises in guilt. The weak form is, I'm lacking something, not really living up to my full potential. I could be a better person. I could be a kinder person, a more generous person. And the strong form is, I don't think I could ever live up to the type of person I am. It's kind of a sense of condemnation. These are all forms of lack. And for Paul Tillich, the courage to be means the courage to face non-being, the lack, right? And so say within an evangelical church, it might be the fear of meaninglessness. So you hold on to meaning because you're worried that maybe life is meaningless and we all die and go nowhere and everyone you've loved will pass and the universe will end in entropy, right? Oh my goodness! And so it might be that, but it might be, but the lack appears in different ways in our lives. It might be a relationship. I've never had real problems with lack of meaning, but I have other problems with other types of lack. It could be in relationships. It manifests in that way. You don't care about having doubts, but you don't like sense of being alone or something. Whatever it is, it manifests in different kind of ways. So the first thing you need is you need to do this in yourself. Kind of like that's the first thing and the last thing. Is you need to be aware of your own anxieties, your own defense mechanisms, your own symptoms. And you need to have the courage to sit with those, to be honest. And this is what artists do. Artists are incredibly bad at lying to themselves. They're terrible. They've got terrible defense mechanisms. They're dysfunctional, right? My friends who are artists who I really respect, they're painfully honest about how they feel, which can be embarrassing. It makes them very interesting people and also very embarrassing people. They're the ones who just say things that everybody else is thinking but wouldn't be able to say. Sometimes a good writer is a person who says what you feel but couldn't put into words, couldn't say, and it's said. You're like, oh yeah, that's how I feel, right? So it's being a person who knows your own defenses so you can be sympathetic to other people's. There's a great little story from Ireland I love about this, but it's about this Texan, very wealthy Texan, whose great-great-grandfather was from Galway, right? And he went to America, made a fortune in oil. Guy's loaded. But this guy, he wants to go back to Ireland, like a lot of Americans. There's more Irish in America than there are in Ireland. But he wants to go back and trace his roots. So he goes to Galway, and he's there, and he realizes he's got relatives. And he goes to a little farm where he's discovered that there's a relative, this little guy Seamus, who was recently actually on a desert island, but that's a different story. We're not going to go there now, but it was 20 years he was on it, but he's back. He's in his... Got back to his farm, and the big Texan with his Texan hat knocks on the door, and Seamus is there. So, oh, how's it going? And the Texan, big guys, like, everyone's big to the Irish, like, we're not a tall race. A big Texan, and Texan says, you're a relative, and my great-great-grandfather left Galway many years ago. He made a fortune for himself in Texas, and I've come back to reconnect with my roots. And Seamus invites him in, they have a cup of tea. And Texan says, are you going to show me around? He says, yeah, come on, I'll show you around. So come out the back, and Seamus says, see, all this is all mine. He says, you see that little, that tree stump? That tree stump to here, that's mine. And, oh, the old tractor there, no, that's all mine. And, and that broken fence, that's all mine. Right to the house, it's all mine. And the Texan laughs. He says, listen, back home, I can get into my car, and I can drive all day north. By the end of the day, I haven't got to the end of my property. So I could drive all day south, wouldn't have got to the end of my property. Could drive all day east, all day west, and I wouldn't have got to the end of my land. And Seamus is like, he says, I know how you feel. He says, I used to have a car like that as well. Right? Now, this is the Christological thing for me. Is that, the Texan's playing the game. He's the fantasy. I've got everything. I've got all this money. I've got all this land. I've got it all. So he's playing this game. Because that's the other thing. I mentioned too, we either can't quite get what we want. We can't quite make that ideal church or that ideal relationship. Can't quite get it. We fantasize that other people have it. Or we pretend that we do. To ourselves and to other people. Like if we want revenge, success is the sweetest revenge, they say. Why? Because, it looks like we're happy, so it really pisses off people who don't like us, right? So you might be in a terrible relationship, but maybe it's with somebody who is socially kind of credible or something. So you stay in a bad relationship because you like the substitute pleasure of people thinking you have pleasure, right? So the Texans playing that game, the Texans going like, I have all of this stuff. But Seamus just sees a broken guy just like him. So, oh yeah, I have a broken car too. Yeah, I know what it's like. I play those games as well, right? That's when you've connected with those parts of yourself, you are much more sympathetic when you see it in other people and other communities. You don't get angry. If you get angry with a community that's saying that they've got the answers, that might mean that in some way there's a little bit of jealousy about that or something. If you just see a group of people who, some of them might feel they have the answers and some of them are just insecure that they don't, you say, yeah, I know. I have to play games with myself as well. You become much more sensitive and much more able to be of use. Because if you haven't done the work yourself, you'll be angry, you'll be frustrated, nobody will listen. You have to, if you're going to guide a community into looking at the dark things, you don't do it unless you've spent years in those wilderness, in the dark night of the soul, in the cloud of unknowing, and going right in there and being honest about it. Not so that you despair. I mean, people hear this and say, oh, you're just trying to make us depressed. You're just trying to make us depressed, And I'm like, I promise I'm not. I'm not trying to make you depressed. I'm telling you that you already are depressed. You just don't know it, right? which is the Kierkegaardian thing of, you can be in despair and not even know you're in despair. How can I be depressed? I'm always out being busy, doing stuff, always out seeing people. Of course, that's what depressed people do, because they can't stand being alone. They have to keep their lives frantically full of things, because if they're alone for 5 minutes, they'll be like, oh, there's stuff there. It's weird to think I could be unhappy and not even know it. But it happens, and doctors are very aware of this. I have a couple of friends I've known who different times have gone to doctors because they've had physical ailments, and they've found nothing wrong. And they've gone like, I think you're depressed. And I'm like, I'm not depressed, I'm just having trouble sleeping, I'm just kind of like got like a rash. It's like, no, I think you're depressed. They're like, no, I'm not depressed, no, I think you're depressed. Oh, I'm depressed. But they don't, because it's a symptom. The physical thing is speaking because they can't speak. And what happens is, if you're able to then kind of embrace that, then the rash goes. Now, there's of course physical reasons for rashes, but if they can't find a physical reason, sometimes it's psychosomatic or inability to sleep. And so the point of doing this work is in a sense not to get depressed. No, it's the opposite. It's to get to the point where we can rob this stuff of its sting and really learn to live, and to live well, and then to help other people live well. And the reason why this is so dangerous if we don't is that this is not like this self-help thing where we're trying to make ourselves feel better and stuff like that. It has political consequences. It has religious consequences. If you can't face your darkness and your brokenness, you will put it onto somebody else. You'll blame somebody else. That's the reason why things aren't working, right? And you put that on the scapegoat. And the whole, I think, inside of in Christianity, you can see is that the scapegoat is a site of our salvation. That's the place we need to go to realize that they're carrying our own lack, and begin to deal with that. I think we've got. I'll stop the official part there, and I'm looking for Ben, but he's probably fallen asleep. Oh yeah, we're okay. How long have we got for Q&A?
20 minutes.
Brilliant. So we've got a little bit of time to.
Just real quick, where's your mic pack? Ian, can you mute his channel real quick? I apologize about the sound pop. No, we've had this forever. Yeah. Maybe changing the batteries. Okay. Either that or it's just you.
Yep, there we go. That's kind of my mop-up for the first 2 sessions. We've got some time for some questions, some comments. Just come up to the mic and share. And you don't have to wait. You can form a little small queue. Get a chance to say what you need to say. And then we're actually eventually going to get into the what does this look like in practice. So any questions or thoughts? Come up to the front. And we can, by the way, don't worry about just sitting in silence for a few minutes. I will fill the silence with more talk if needs be. Oh. I've got the kulak thing wrong.
Yeah, kulaks are technically, it's a Soviet phenomenon.
Oh.
Soviet's not Russia, but other than that, you did great. And
thanks. Appreciate that. Yeah.
Teaches Eastern Europe and Russia. Like, I love hearing about fascism and kulaks. Like, it really does it for me. That's great. So my question is actually well and good. Like, this is great, and like what you're saying, I think has so much resonance. But again, as somebody who is a historian and like thinking now, I work on Ukraine about like the relationship between Ukraine and Russia. Like, on the one hand, I'm like, oh my God, it's like they can't take the Soviet other, right? Or when you look at civil wars as a phenomenon, like, what is a civil war, right? I mean, so much of it is this externalization of the other, right? In terms of violence, but like, you're not going to sit down, like, I'm not going to sit down with Putin and be like, hey, so what really happened with your marriage? And like, I know like your daughter has kind of rejected you. That must feel really stressful. And, that's not going to work politically.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? And so where's the limits of your voice and your message? And are there limits, and what are the political consequences?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the example for me, take Bonhoeffer, Second World War, Nazi Germany, the confessing church. This is an example where I think that what the confessing church were trying to do, again, is simply bring up to the surface the unspoken transgressions of the church that was basically affirming the violence and the Nazi system. And so what was happening was the confessing church, the very name confessing church, to confess, to bring to the surface the unspoken. But what this means politically is, I think that the political act, and it's not the only act, there's lots of acts, but the political act is attempting to speak what we all know, but we do want to know that we know. And that's why I used Ferguson, I think, briefly as an example, where I was going like, politically, the idea of the protesters is to bring to the surface what's unspoken, and have it there, so that the system kind of like, to the point where things collapse and something has to change. So yeah, that's the political concept. Do you want to say something about that? Because you're still beside the mic, so feedback.
No,
it's
I
good.
just didn't know if I could
Yeah, no, it's good because that's when you sit back and then you might have something to say. Yeah. So have you got any thoughts on that? If not, that's fine. But
I mean, I guess I would agree with that. Is it okay to say something more, Ben? There's a year ago, there was a lot of violence on the square in Ukraine where people have been protesting. 100 people were killed. The president left and kind of initiated all of this process that's now in a war right now. And it's really interesting, a lot of the discussions that are happening about what was that protest. And a friend of mine just wrote a piece about how it really was the protest of people trying to bring stuff to the surface, right? And trying to sort of say, like, let's not live in this reality anymore where I have to pay a bribe to have a piece of paper, to like change a dentist or something, right? Like let's acknowledge that. Let's get out on the square and let's protest that, which is a really beautiful, wonderful thing, the protest of dissent, rights-based dissent. Mm-hmm. Right, just speaking for humanity, speaking for rights, but it's dissolved into this war that's really ugly, and I don't see that rights-based dissent or that ability to bring to the surface. Well, what's been brought to the surface is you all to die, right? Yeah. Like that's what came up out of the surface. So it feel like I'm listening to you, and I'm like, yes, but what about the horrible reality that we all live in, and the fact that you're trying to dialogue with people who don't want to dialogue with you. Yeah. I mean, that's sounding very confused and whatever, but yeah. I'm just...
No, absolutely. And the political sense is, it's not exactly, you sit down with Putin and you say, tell me about your childhood. In the political scheme, it's the same as with Christ. What Christ did is, there was the religious system in all its purity, the whitewashed tomb, and then there was the stuff that was happening beneath the surface, the power, the privilege, all of that, and it was bringing that up and letting it sit so that you're confronted with your own disavowed desires. That's the key. You're confronted with your own self. Now, when that happens in a system, the system will try to kill you. Like if it's a political system, it'll try to bribe you. It'll try to kind of integrate you into the system. It will try and all systems try to find homeostasis, and so by doing that, all systems will find ways of trying to maintain equilibrium. In the marriage, you bring that stuff up again. The desire is to push it back down, and the therapist in a therapeutic session with the couple is having to try to keep the stuff at the surface. Not saying where the relationship will go, just keeping it at the surface. So eventually, something happens and something ruptures. So that's the figure of the prophet, is that continually rising. But one thing which you've made me think about, you can stand there, sit down, whatever you want to do.
I'll sit down, thank you. Keep going.
Keep going, okay. Is that you've got to be careful. There's two types of protest I think you can talk about. One is the jester protest and the other is the trickster protest. The jester protest is where a jester is someone who makes fun of the king and the queen and the royal family, right? But they're employed by the king and the queen and the royal family, right? So they attack it and they mock it, but they're part of it. And if they do it too well, they'll get killed, right? But if they don't do it enough, they'll also get in trouble. Sometimes the Joker had a very rough ride. They had to be funny and basically make fun of the symptom and make fun of the system in such a way that it was endorsed by the system. And of course, the example of that in political terms is a protest that the authorities allow. Yeah, of course you can protest between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in this park, and you pick up all the rubbish at the end of the day and you don't stop any traffic, right? That's a protest system that is endorsed by the system, right? So it allows a gas release valve while ensuring that nothing changes. And so all political systems and religious systems will try to integrate the transgression into the system, right? The Amish have a tradition where you can go off, have a blast for a year at 18 or whatever, wink and a nod, go off, do whatever you want to do, backslide basically, and then you can come back if you want and be part of the community. What's happened there is that they've been able to find a way to bring the transgression, backsliding, actually into the system itself. Now, I'm going to do a little bit more on this, sorry, very quickly, but this is the perfect reading of the prodigal, right? This is the reading of the prodigal that every church seems to affirm, but I want to critique, is the idea that the prodigal is part of a wealthy family, right? And this reading is from Kester Bruin from a book called Mutiny. It's a radical reading of the prodigal son story. But the prodigal son story on the surface is about this kid from a very wealthy family, profoundly wealthy internal community, family of 3, father, 2 sons, who leaves, takes money from the dad, and goes out and has a blast, right? He says, I want my inheritance now, I'm going to go out there, right? Then things go wrong, and he comes back, and the father welcomes him in. Says, come on back in, it's all great, it's all okay, right? Now, what Kester does in Mutiny is he says, this story, we read it like this is Christianity. Kester says, what if this is the opposite of Christianity? This is brilliant. He says, let's just read it for a second, let's read it a little bit differently, right? So this kid loaded, the family loaded. And by the way, remember, people who are reading this at that time, what would they hear? If you have that amount of money at that time, oh my goodness, people are starving and dying on the other side of the fence, right? You have slaves. You have all the cattle. You have servants, right? It's not even like the disparity between wealthy and poor here now. It's like, that on steroids, right? So there's this crazy wealthy family. And yeah, the son goes, give me my money now. I want to go out and see the world. I've experienced hunger. I've never experienced what's going on out there. Dad must have been unhappy. This is, Kester says, it's basically going to university. You take your parents' money and you go out and get drunk, right? So the kid wants to go to university. Fair enough. So he goes out into the world. And it says he experiences a world of suffering, a world of pain, and it's difficult out there. Wow, my goodness, it's hard. In fact, a famine hits the land, and he ends up eating out of a trough, eating food with the animals. And then it says this in the story. It says, he thinks to himself, I'll go back to my home, but I won't go back as a son. I'll go back as a labourer. I'll do a day's work and get a day's pay. Fair enough. Pretty cool, right? So he's on his way back, but like any conservative father, it's like, oh my goodness, he's been out in the world. He's been at that liberal university. What is he going to come back with, right? Talking to those crazy liberals, right? So he's walking back. This parable is very different from the others. In the other parables, someone's out looking, like the farmer's out looking for the one lost sheep, or the woman's looking for the one lost penny, right? This is weird because the father doesn't go out of the enclosure. He stays. He's not looking for his son, right? They're making a film, by the way, of this. The Christian films are a big thing now. They're making a prodigal son. And it's funny because some wealthy, very wealthy businessman, son goes out, buys loads of fancy cars and all of that, and then comes back and cries and goes back into the wealthy family, right? So this is what happens. So the father hears that the son's coming back. Oh God, right, okay. So he goes to the edge of the property, and the son's about to give him his speech, and the father's like, oh no, don't say a word, don't say anything, don't say. Here, try on this cloak. That'll warm you up. You must be cold. Put on this ring of power. You're part of the family. You have all of this. That's not for you out there. All that poverty and suffering. No. This is for you. And oh, hey, you got an empty stomach. Got a fattened calf for you, right? Come on in. And so the older son's like, is annoyed. I had to stay. I'm the older son. I've got responsibilities. You're the younger son. You could have gone out and done something. You were alive and now you're dead, right? Now, this is a really interesting reading when you think about it. I think it's phenomenal because it's dark. It's like, oh, it challenges everything. Anyone who's read Henri Nouwen or whatever, or seen the Rembrandt painting, it suddenly changes it all. It all becomes a bit icky. But, you know, the thing that Kester brings out in Mutiny, and it's a book I really recommend you read, is that he says, first of all, before we go to the biblical, why this might be a biblical reading, it's just a tragedy from a pure storytelling angle, right? It's like, you know, nothing changes. And the father doesn't change, everything, the person, they mess up and they come back, and basically the end of the story is the same as the start. He says, you know, the pirate story, the story of transformation is the Star Wars story. It's the same story, Star Wars. You know, there's that point where Luke Skywalker finds out that Darth Vader's his father, and Darth Vader does the prodigal thing. Come back, and we can rule the universe together. Don't hang out with all of these rebels. Look, come in. We can have this. We will rule father and son, right? But Luke Skywalker says, no. He refuses, and he ultimately converts the father. The end in Return of the Jedi. And Kester also uses the example of Peter Pan, where Wendy is on the eve of becoming a woman, right? And yet her parents go out to the theater and leave her alone, and Peter Pan comes and says, come to Never Never Land, where you need never grow old. And so she does. But she becomes a mother of sorts to the Lost Boys. And time comes back. We can't escape time. LA is the place where people try to escape time. But time comes back. Everyone looks eternally young in LA. It's weird. But time goes, and it comes back in the guise of a crocodile. You know, it's swallowed the pirate's hand with a watch, tick, tick, tick. And the pirate's in there, and Wendy has to overcome the pirate, and eventually overcomes the pirate and returns to her family home. Now, what's interesting is, who is the actor that plays the pirate? Yeah, the same actor who plays the dad. It's a story of how Wendy, to become a woman, has to overcome her father, right? Differentiate from the family. It's part of what it means to grow up. And part of what it means, I think, to be a parent is, one is not to be like, I listen to these conservative stations, radio stations, I'm kind of a bit obsessed with them. And they, you know, they sometimes give you DVDs about how to get your kids to do what you want, right? And you listen to if their kids are disobedient, right? It's awful because, you know, kids act out, and if they don't, they repress it all, and then they end up like killing cats, right? So you got, but you know, but then the liberal families are even worse, right? They're the ones who are going, we're going to be kind to our kid, and if they're going to act out, we're going to be super sweet, and we're going to be able to, oh, this school's going to be lovely. That's awful. How do you write rock music about that, right? How do you write poetry about your parents being really nice? You have to have something to wrestle against. But the great thing about being a parent, I think, is the point when your kids come back to the dinner table after they've been away for a while, and then they challenge you, and they're the instrument of your transformation, because they get you to rethink your political, religious, cultural ideas. That's challenging to a parent, but it's also kind of wonderful that you give so much to your children, and now in this really interesting twist, now they are kind of challenging you. So how does Kester why does he read the prodigal in this way? Well, he says, I'll tell you a different story, right? Family of three who have known no suffering, who have never known what it means to be hungry. And in this story, the son goes away as well, goes into the world to experience it. Oh, and like the prodigal, experiences the world's suffering. In fact, starts off with the animals around him, like feeding out of troughs, right? And this son, experiences hunger and poverty and famine and all of that stuff, right? And this son, his father doesn't come out to get him either. But if he calls on the messengers, the father will send out some messengers who'll take him home, right? So he can go back. He can go back at any time. So now you're reading this story and going, what's going to happen? Is he going to go back? But this son doesn't. He says, where are you? Why have you forsaken me? And at that point, the enclosure, the thing that blocks the inner wealth from the rest of the world, rips in half. And God has to come into the world. and be found here in the midst. And so Kester's reading is to be faithful to Christianity is to fight and wrestle with one's sovereignty, with the ideological system. The trickster is the one who fights within the ideological system. The trickster is the one who fights the ideological system itself, right? And actually instigates real transformation. Now, the other insight, I think, in this narrative is that God fights God. My God, why have you forsaken me? We are fighting a system that we created. There's a brilliant TV program from the 1950s, a British surrealist TV program you should all watch called The Prisoner. And in The Prisoner, it's Patrick McGoogan, I think it's him, but he's a brilliant writer. Yeah, brilliant writer, brilliant. He directed some Columbos. He's brilliant. But it's all about this secret agent who is knocked out and awakes in this village where everything seems perfect, but everything's very, very strange and surreal and actually not good, oppressive. But you can't tell who the prisoners are and who the guards are. There's no walls, but everything's weird. And everyone's given a number, and he's given the number 6. He's number 6, right? And you always, every week, find that there's a number 2 who's in control of everything, except number 2 answers to number 1, right? And every week, this guy is trying to find out who is number 1. Number 2 is terrified of number 1, and number 2 is always changed. We can't find out who is number 1. And there's a brilliant thing. Every week, it has this amazing opening where you see this guy getting knocked out and brought to the island. And then there's the dialogue. Where am I? You know, you're in the village. Who are you? That would be telling. What do you want? We want information. Who are you? I am number 2. Who is number 1? You're number 6, right? Who's number 1? You're number 6. Right? And he's always wondering. And then in the very final episode, you discover who number 1 is. And I'm going to tell you because it was the 1950s. So if you didn't watch it, you're out of time. It's like, oh, I'm not telling you what happened last week. I'm telling you what happened 40 years ago, right? So yeah, you missed it. But it's the most brilliant reveal I've ever seen on any TV show, because he rips off the mask of number 1. And it's him. And you realize that every week it gave you the answer. Every week it told you who number 1 was. Who is number 1? You are number 6. Very clever, right? The idea is that we are part of a system that we have to fight against. So we have to cut against ourselves. The insurrectionary move is a move against our own communities that we are a part of and that are part of us. We have to cut against ourselves in order to be part of this transforming thing. And so when we're in church and we're in our church communities, we're not cutting against them. We're cutting against something in ourselves. We're fighting against ourselves. We do that for the sake of justice, the sake of the oppressed and the poor. And in a sense, we transform the very structure itself. It's a very long answer to a short question. Maybe we should officially break and have Q&A. We can maybe start with a bit of Q&A in the next session, because you also need a bit of time to relax and think. I mean, are we at the time's end? Yeah, we are. Cool. So,
if the iPad stayed on it would have told you.
Yeah, it went off.
Let's take a break. Let's take a straight hour. And so there's coffee that's ready here. Feel free to relax. There's some couches in back if you need a space. Highly recommend taking a walk downtown. We'll go ahead and start right at 3:30 again for the final session. If you have questions, we sort of toyed around with the idea of giving the opportunity to write some stuff down, and then if there's ways that Pete can address that in the last session or even in tomorrow evening's thing. So you can do that. Looks like we got some snack stuff set out in back if you're hungry. Elizabeth has some stuff back there. Sweet. Yeah, meet some people you don't know. Again, the books will be for sale over there. You can get stuff signed by Pete. Hang out for an hour, decompress a little, mental sorbet, and then we'll come back for the final course.